Hey, typology friends, welcome back to the podcast where we explore the mystery of the human personality and the human adventure. And today we got a doozy. I have been looking forward to this conversation for weeks. And I am thrilled today that in addition to my confrere, Anthony Skinner, always in the house, that we have with us Enneagram 6, Counterphobic 6, Keith Kurlander, and Enneagram 3, Dr. Will Vanderveer, authors of an amazing new book. And I'm going to tell you all this right now. I have read this book cover to cover. I have underlined it like nuts. The title is Psychedelic Therapy, a revolutionary approach to restoring your mental health and reclaiming your life. Now, I want to just up front say something to the audience before we jump in. I just want to name my position here. During the show, I'm not endorsing psychedelic therapy. I am genuinely curious and very hopeful about its clinical applications and possibilities. And I want to approach this conversation from a very thoughtful, research-based, psychologically responsible perspective, as I know our two guests do as well, which is why I really appreciate their work. My goal is to understand how this very important, much talked about work right now intersects with trauma, spiritual formation, attachment, meaning, healing, all the things that we care about here on typology, and how it's actually showing up in real people's lives. So, Will, Keith, welcome to the show.
Woo woo!
Wonderful to be here.
Glad y'all are here.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to dive in.
Let's have at it. So, Keith, you're an Enneagram 6. You're a counterphobic 6. We've already witnessed a little bit of that in the pre-record moments. It was charming, as always is the case with 6s. Tell me how you learned about the Enneagram and how it has impacted your life, if at all.
Well, I spent a lot of my early years wondering why I was always looking over my shoulder. You know, everywhere I went, I'm like afraid someone's going to attack me, or, I'm afraid when I'm driving. And so I just had a lot of fear and wondering what that was about. But the Enneagram eventually came about through, I'm a therapist. And in Boulder, it's a very well-known system that people really rely on in terms of just my community and a little bit with clients and that. And so I've read a number of books and had friends that went really deep into it and did trainings. And my wife and I, it's worked really well for us. She's a 2, I'm a 6. I'm a 5-wing. She's got a 3-wing. So it's helped us in our relationship of just understanding each other, and, why I'm always like shrieking when she says something to me, and why she's always, upset when I'm shrieking. So it's worked well in my career. It's worked with clients well, and I love the Enneagram. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, I appreciate it. It's I tell people all the time, the Enneagram is not perfect, and it does not decode the mystery of people's internal experience or of their inner architecture, but it's true enough that it is tremendously useful. Will, how about you? What was your introduction, and what was it like to find out you were a 3?
Well, I was a resident in psychiatry in the late 90s, and most of my friends were going through Naropa in grad school. And so they were learning a lot about the Enneagram. Keith went to Naropa as well. And I started studying the different types, and that led me to an interesting guy. I think he's a Chilean psychiatrist named Claudio Naranjo.
Yes.
Who actually, I think he's a polymath. He was very interested in Ikazo and like the origins of the Enneagram, but he also was very deep in psychedelic therapy research. So he bridged these two worlds, and I ended up reading a few of his books, and it was way over my head. But learning about being a performer and being ambitious, and why I have the false self that wants to achieve and get all the merit badges, why it was important to me to become an Eagle Scout and so forth. It helped me understand that dynamic in myself.
It's been said by some that your Enneagram type is in part a virtue of innate or inborn temperament. At the same time, it is, how do I want to say this? That personality and your type arise in response to trauma or childhood wounding as a strategy for navigating relationships, life. And as you think about your life, Keith, like, can you draw a line between your early childhood experience and your evolving into this Enneagram Type 6 pattern? And can you even locate an experience that may have given, is the big bang for your Enneagram 6-ness?
Well, what I'll say is, so I had a lot of complex trauma as a child. The thing I've come to sort of my own belief with the Enneagram is I think that these types sort of lead as primary. And as we clear out trauma, you start to see all the types show up in the background is kind of my belief system as we really clean up the trauma. And then we could see all the types more clearly. And then there's like a primary one leading the show. That's been my experience. So like the more I've overcome my trauma, the less I look like a 6 over time. I still look like a 6. I mean, you'd pin me down in a second, but over time I look less like a 6, and you're like, oh, and he looks like a 1, or he looks like a 2 or 3. So I think that's kind of my belief, but it's very pronounced, especially when I'm either in a traumatic response or just back in the day when I was always in a traumatic response. It was very pronounced that I was a 6. I mean, it was like blaringly obvious. And it was just my coping strategies are just 6 type coping strategies, and often go with, withdraw within. And I have the type 5 wings, so I'm like very heady and got that engineer's brain. And so I'm trying to fix my problems in my head all the time, which don't usually work for me, but I try.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much. And Will, how about you? Can you look back on, was there a core wound that you have experienced that you think contributed to the development of your type 3 pattern?
I've thought about this a lot and spent a lot of time in therapy exploring it over the years. There was plenty of trauma in my childhood. And I think the biggest theme was early father loss. And I think that my pursuit of the credentials that our society offers people, trophies, I mentioned merit badges metaphorically, but also literally for me. I think some of that was trying to get my father's attention when he came through town, because he wasn't around much. And I also think that the other theme was with my family of origin that my mother, in my father's absence, was quite overwhelmed. And so I experienced a kind of a push inside of myself to be the child that achieved things and didn't need a lot. And so the going after achievement helped me be less of a burden to her in my unconscious approach. So those were the main things between mom and dad. Yeah.
It's interesting. Something you said, Keith, is I'm more aware of this than ever today, that we contain all 9 types, right? Like it's not as if we just have exclusive attachment to, we have a dominant type, but we contain all of these energies, all of these patterns, all of these things. And it's just that one is particularly present, activated, and we become very attached to the strategy. And in my experience, as people do their work, and this is just, again, sort of a more recent insight, you do see that the other 9 types become clearer in us, right? The energies become clearer. It's as if someone is removing obstacles, trauma obstacles, right? And now our field of vision becomes clearer, and all these types become more available to us, the gifts that they have to bring us. And interestingly, and I don't know if this is just a function of getting older, which I seem to be doing every day as well, the older I get, the more I feel like I'm becoming a 9. It's just, I just see these energies over time changing in me, even though I'm a dominant 4 and will always be that. There is this kind of very 9 quality that I see as people age. What do you think, Will? Does that sound right? That peacemaker, that all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well kind of energy you hope comes to us in later years?
Well, I remember reading somewhere that as the 9 sort of develops over time, they go more toward a 3. That as a 3 develops over time, they go more toward a 6. And as a 6 develops over time, where do they go, Keith?
9.
Yeah, to 9. And I don't so much see myself doing that. So it always was a question mark for me about how does that work? But I certainly do see more of that kind of quality of Buddha that I see in the 9 of being more neutral, more accepting, maybe more caring for the whole, more of an evolved type 9, maybe you could say.
Yeah.
As opposed to the more primitive 9 where the person might be disappearing into the woodwork a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. That whole arrow thing is so interesting, right? And of course, whenever we talk about this stuff, these are approximations, right? Like these are not, we don't have an MRI, your type doesn't show up, right? But so these are these kind of blurry, but, clear enough that we get some ability to relate to what we see. So that when that 3 is under stress, where it goes is to the unhealthy side of 9. Mm-hmm. So you might, when you're under stress, you might, let's say you don't have a clear, achievable goal with rewards. Yeah. A typical 3 would start to experience a sense of lostness, a sense of kind of being depressed, maybe less concerned about their appearance, maybe numbing out on the couch with a sleeve of donuts, watching the Netflix, watching The Pit, whatever the case may be. But when they're doing great, they go to the high side of 6, to that healthy side of 6.
Interesting.
Where they start to become less of the lone wolf, interested in their own advancement only, but they become more communally minded. They become less concerned about image and about the symbols of success. They become more practical, more not needing to drive the bus. They're okay just being another person on the bus. It's just, they kind of relax. Again, useful and helpful. And of course, Keith, that when 6s are doing great, they go to the high side of 9 where they find that peace. The anxiety kind of evaporates, the catastrophizing goes offline, all this stuff.
Yeah, we do well in actual threatening situations, which is interesting about type 6s. Mm-hmm. We're always waiting for them, but and looking over shoulder. But when they come, we tend to do really well.
You're the most prepared.
Yeah, and that's where we could show up as 9s. When I was in college, it kind of stood out where there was this huge fight starting at a party with 50 guys and 50 guys coming up and I just like instinctively walked in between them and I was like, "Hey, everyone, the cops are here," and they all ran. And I'm like,
that's great.
Everybody just took off, and then what was funny was the head guy of each group came up to me later. Was, "Thanks for doing that. I didn't really want to get in a brawl." So the type 9 shows up. 6s are just. They're waiting for an event, and typically when the events happen, we're like, "Okay, we're okay. We know what to do."
How has being a 6 been a gift in a therapeutic setting? What about a 6 makes a great therapist?
We're skeptical, so we don't really take anything anyone says at face value. Anybody opens their mouth, I'm already going, "That's not true." So as a therapist, it's a good skill because it's like, you're like, well, what's really the meaning underneath that? Or, what are you really saying? So I think the skeptic of the 6 is a helpful thing. It's also with a 5 wing, that kind of brain is really helpful in therapy. It's dissecting and engineering the architecture of people's stories, and that's been helpful too. So I think there's a number of ways it can really help to be a 6. And 6s scan the environment a lot, and they're really paying attention unconsciously to the micro behaviors and things that people are doing and saying. And 6s tend to be very empathic.
That's so interesting. I had a friend of mine, you're talking about your 5 wing. Most people don't think of 5s as being great therapists because they are sort of emotionally distant. It can feel aloof.
Yeah.
They can not make a rich emotional connection with another person. But the finest therapist I ever knew was a Jungian analyst who was a 5 on the Enneagram.
Oh.
And he had this non-anxious presence. You could literally walk into his office with a spear in your chest and he'd be like, interesting, let's sit down and talk about the spear in your chest. He just was, but also that engineering mind. And he was, I think he had a 6 wing. He didn't have a 4 wing because that's pretty easy to spot. That's a pretty quirky combination. That's that, they present very quirkily. This was, I think he had a 6 wing, but he was so good at what he did because he had genuine care, but it was expressed as engagement at the level of helping people understand the story as a 5. So I can see where the 6 and the 5 come in really handy for you, Keith. Will, what about with you? Like with being a 3, like what? How has that been a gift to you in your work of being in the people helping profession?
Well, I think that there's a strong 2 wing in me that has me feeling the injuries of other people in a really acute way. In fact, early on in the Enneagram study 25 years ago, I identified more as a 2 with a 3 wing. But I think the way the 3 has showed up for me is in my relationship to the field of medicine as a physician coming through training and seeing the limitations of the psychiatry tools that I learned and deciding that I was going to do things differently. I was going to learn more tools and that we would eventually start an institute together, me and Keith, to teach other physicians, nurse practitioners, and therapists how to address the root causes that are not really trained in medical school. We were talking about Vanderbilt, which is an outstanding medical school, but I got 1 hour of nutrition at Vanderbilt, not even a whole course. And then, we know now things that we didn't know in the 90s, like the gut-brain connection and the role of infections and inflammation and brain injuries and so on. So the decision to go out and lead and try to contribute to a movement to do things differently, I think was driven by that confidence to do things differently and to lead people.
Yeah, beautiful. You also have a lot of 4 qualities.
Yeah, that's true.
You have a lot of 4 qualities as well. And I would argue that, not argue, but maybe suspect that some of that 4 quality is what has opened you up to thinking about these new interventions like psychedelic therapy, like just a kind of openness to that, all the gifts and the possibilities that may lie therein. And I want to talk again, going back to psychedelic therapy, this amazing new book, and I think this drops in March. Is that correct?
Yeah, March 31st.
Man, I love this book. And let me just wax eloquent on this book for a second. So a couple of years ago, this guy came up to me at a party, a very well-known author here in town. And he came up to me, this guy, Anthony, I won't say who it is, but he came up to me and he's like, hey man, listen, I have been leading people on these retreats in New Mexico. It's a psilocybin, mushroom retreat. And, I can kind of be your guide. And I looked at him and I was like, who the hell do you even think you are, bro? Like you are a self-designated shaman, like messing around with some powerful, in your context, I'd say medicines. For him, I'd just say recreational drugs, which is an entirely different thing, right? And I was actually really put off as a therapist. I was like, man, oh man, that is just not a go for me. And then years later, I'm with a therapist who I really like. And here's what they said to me. I'll use a little bit of your language from the book. She said, Ian, I don't think talk therapy is going to help you anymore. She said, you're 65 years old. You've been through a ton of therapy. You're a recovering addict, alcoholic. You've done a ton of work around that. You really don't want to rehearse your family history anymore. To me now, it's kind of like, it's so boring. And I've actually done so much work around it. I don't have a lot of like outstanding unresolved issues. I think they're sufficiently resolved and integrated. She said, what you have are ruminative kind of default loops in your mind of negative thinking at times. And she said, I think psychedelic therapy would really help you. Now, what that did is it launched me on a 5-year journey of reading all the research I could get my hands on about psychedelic therapy. And what I came away with was this feeling like, okay, first of all, I think this is the next frontier in mental health treatment. And it needs advocates that are smart, judicious, prudent, research-based, evidence-based practitioners to prevent it from going off the rails, as things will do when the new or innovative comes onto the scene. And I read your book and I'm like, these are the guys. These are the guys. This is a really well-written book. And you were mentioning earlier, Will, that in medical school or now you realize, that mental health therapy, yeah, it's wonderful, it's good, but it has limitations. And you ran into those limitations repeatedly. What are the limitations of therapy from your guys' perspective?
Well, I'll start, and Keith, you can follow up with me here. The biggest problem is that, well, it's hard to start. Where do you start? The biggest problem is that the conventional tools that are currently available to resolve true clinical diagnoses work pretty well for about a third of the people who seek help. They work marginally for another third, and they don't work at all for the other third of people. So the common statistics that you see show that about 2/3 of people seeking answers from mental health care try again, but don't get much in the way of results. And they may have significant side effects too, if you're talking about medications especially. So we have a hockey stick curve of a global crisis in mental health.
Yeah, it's uncanny. Keith, what were you going to say?
I think that therapy, I'm a therapist. I mostly coach. As I was growing in my career, I kind of went toward coaching, but therapy helps a lot of people, obviously. There's nothing wrong with therapy. I think that one of the traps of therapy is people can end up just ruminating around their story over and over, and a therapist not intervening. And so, it's sort of almost like a psychoanalytic process for a lot of people, but without even really good reflection back. So there's one problem is people are doing a lot of storytelling. And if they've never had any storytelling in their life, they don't have a space for that. That can be healing. But I think for the most part, it keeps people stuck in the narratives they're already in. So that's one problem. I think the other problem in general in mental health care is we're not trained well in what the root causes of these conditions are. If you're trained as a therapist, you're going to likely get to look at some, ego development stuff and childhood trauma stuff and attachment stuff. And then if you're a medical doctor, you're going to understand like symptom clusters and what meds work. But we don't really do a good job at being like, well, here are the root causes of what you're dealing with probably. And it's somewhere in here. Trauma is a huge central focus typically in any condition. Your body is probably injured. If you're very significantly ill, you probably have issues with, your gut-brain axis is not functioning right probably. And, there's this whole rabbit hole that's just never talked about really. Nutrition, if you keep eating that way, you're just going to keep getting sick. No matter how much therapy you do, you're not going to feel great. Metabolic issues. So there's just so much not known in the general education of mental health care providers. Mm-hmm. It's very reductionistic often, or it's siloed. And it's this one sliver. And that's an issue where a lot of people are not getting better. So I think the proof is in the pudding. A lot of people aren't getting better, and we're not even making a dent at all in the mental health crisis as a mental health care system. Like, we see the rates climbing. We have new issues now in the last 10 to 15 years that is social issues. But I think that psychedelic therapy is a tool when it's used well. It's with the right person. It can cause a disruption and get someone moving down the road. But we need all these tools. And yeah, so I just leave it at that I think, generally speaking, people just are not well trained in the root causes of these conditions.
Yes. And it's also very difficult it's a question of access. How do we access these root causes, right? That are so masked and protected, actually, against us accessing them, because it might be a re-traumatizing event. And so we just don't want to go there. We need help. So Will, my question to you is, now we come right to the $60,000 question, right? What is psychedelic therapy, and what hope does it offer to healthcare workers and to people who are suffering? How might it be of benefit to them?
Well, first of all, psychedelic therapy is a pattern disruptor. So Keith was talking about how in long-term therapy, people often are reinforcing their story rather than having it disrupted. So it's the nature of the mind. The default mode network is the neuroscience term for the way we get into a rut with our understanding of who we are and what the possibilities are of our life. So traditional psychedelics disrupt that electrical pattern in the brain for a period of time. Depends on how long, depends on which psychedelic you're on. So that what happens inside of that disruption is that people will often make statements while they're on the psychedelic like, I feel like I'm up above my life. I can see the forest for the trees. I can see how stuck I am in my story, but I see all of this territory that I could explore. So it gives someone an opportunity to consider that their story is not always true, or maybe not true at all, such as I'm a victim of my parents' abuse, right? That might be part of the story, but there's also all of this resilience and all of this resource in this person, all of this health that they're not even aware of. The other thing that happens in psychedelic therapy that's really exciting is known as the nonspecific amplifier effect. So many people have traumatic experiences and patterns in their nervous system that are below their level of awareness. And so on the few hours within the psychedelic experience, they can make contact with these patterns. It's interesting, you were talking about talk therapy is not going to help you anymore. You're 65, maybe you need to go in another direction. So one thing we often see with psychedelic therapy is that the body is communicating through sensation, through tension, all kinds of nausea, could even be vomiting, depending on the psychedelic. And these somatic experiences are how the body communicates that there are things that haven't been integrated in our past. And so a well-trained therapist who understands how to work with these sensations can provide the right support so that a person can metabolize these nonverbal traumatic patterns and come out on the other side into the integration period, which we should also probably talk about in terms of psychedelic therapy because it's so critical.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about that, Keith. Like, for those who are completely unaware of what we're talking about, let's just talk about the actual psychedelics that we're referring to, right? Psilocybin, MDMA, LSD. I guess we could include that in there. Ibogaine, ayahuasca. We've heard, lots of these terms among others. And DMT, I guess, is another one. So, and depending on where you live and what's available according to the law and whatnot, when we're talking about availability, what is the process, right? Like, help people understand, like, okay, here is a clinically responsible, intelligent, research-based approach to psychedelic therapy. Just walk them through the process from pre-sessions, the actual session, integrate, all that stuff.
Well, the most widely available psychedelic for psychedelic therapy that's legal is ketamine. Ketamine is a prescription drug. It's been around for many decades. Around the early 2000s, some small studies started showing that it was very effective in small doses for depression, treatment-resistant depression. And so mostly what people will be accessing in this moment above ground would be ketamine therapy. That might change very soon. We have MDMA therapy and psilocybin potentially happening. Approval could be this year, it could be next year if it gets approved at the FDA level. So what is ketamine therapy, if we just start there? Because these medicines, the details of how it's done, they're all slightly different. Ketamine therapy is typically 4 to 6 sessions, could be over a month, course of a month. Usually if it's done in sort of a robust therapy model, you're going to have 1 to 2 preparation sessions with a therapist. And then in that preparation sessions, they're going to talk to you about the medicine, a little bit about what to expect, safety, but really working on like what your intentions are, what are you trying to get out of this, helping people really get clear. Why are they willing to put themselves through this process? And generally, it's people who have suffered from a good deal of depression. It's used in other things, trauma and anxiety, but then you're sort of entering the treatment phase where you start the dosing sessions. Those are usually 2 hours. And in an ideal world, there's a therapist there with you. You could end up in a ketamine clinic where you never even talk to a therapist about anything. And sometimes you can get really freaked out and traumatized in that setting. So ideally, there's a therapist there with you. Ideally, they're well trained and they're not over-suggesting and kind of steering your journey any direction. They're really acting as a guide and support to the process that is naturally occurring inside of you. And then those are usually followed up with integration sessions in between each dosing session at the end, where you're processing what happened and you're trying to take an experience and a memory of an experience into action in your life, right? We want to kind of bridge a 1 moment, 2 hour session and make changes in our life. And that's where kind of, I think the rubber meets the road and the real work begins, is in the integration sessions where you're really trying to integrate what happened in those sessions and take the insights from those sessions and make use of them in your life. And with all that said, there's biological things that'll happen from these medicines either way that might really reduce your symptoms and all that. But the integration's really, I think, where the long-term durability could start to take hold.
I really like this because I want people to know that, like, for me, this is just my own take on this. I'm very cautiously enthusiastic about the possibilities of psychedelic therapy because I think there are, as we mentioned, issues that we can't actually get to the, as you mentioned, root causes because our mind, or how we want to say it, our psyche has blessed us with defenses against our actually getting it to these root causes. And I think this is what my therapist was trying to say. Like, we could talk around this forever, Ian. You can talk about at the intellectual level, an understanding of these things, but you actually, at this point, you need a gardener to come in and start to pull these things up at the roots, right? And I was really taken with that idea. And that default mode network is something that I'm well aware of in my own life, right? Like, I just know, okay, I'm in this loop. Here we go. I'm in that negative self-commentary loop. Here we go. And it's just going to run.
Yeah.
And so to have a therapy that can interrupt the circuit, or with trauma, to be able to detonate that capsule of trauma somehow, and then integrate, learn from that post-traumatic growth that can happen, is made possible in that process. But I want everyone to know, I am not a believer in psychedelic therapy unless it is in a clinical setting with trained professionals with well-sourced chemicals, if you will, medicines, where that process of integration is highlighted as absolutely essential, and where it's safe and where it's done responsibly and ethically. These are the things that really matter to me. And I think if we have all those things in place, this is a really exciting possibility for people.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever wondered how the Enneagram can help support your own mental health or help others do the same? Next week, I'll be teaching at Ennea Summit, Mental Health, a free 4-day virtual summit exploring what happens when personality encounters anxiety, trauma, and addiction, all through a thoughtful, clinically grounded lens. In my session on day 1, I'll talk about the subtle ways each type looks for fixes to deal with internal distress and how the Enneagram helps us name what's really running the show so we can recover our freedom to love and be loved. It's happening February 17 to 20 with daily on-demand sessions from 30-plus trusted voices. This summit brings together 30-plus clinicians, practitioners, and teachers, people who love the Enneagram and respect the complexity of the human person, to explore what happens when personality meets, again, anxiety, trauma, addiction, and ways to find healing. Each day, sessions land right in your inbox, and you get 30 hours to watch. There's also a private Facebook group, bonus resources from speakers, and a practitioner panel tackling real-world questions with clinical nuance. And if you want to go all in, there's an all-access pass with lifetime access to transcripts, audio, a workbook, and a frankly ridiculous amount of bonuses. It's free, it's deep, and it's the kind of conversation your mental health deserves. Get your free ticket now at ianmorgancron.com/Ennea Summit. Will, I want to ask you this question. Can you give us a story, just a real life story of someone maintaining their anonymity, obviously, where it was like you saw how powerful an intervention psychedelic therapy can be for people?
Boy, there's so many examples. I think maybe the best one to share here is a veteran who I worked with, who was a participant in one of the MDMA studies I was involved in. And he came back with a pretty substantial moral injury from what he saw in combat. And he was in the Middle East. And when he got back, he was put on the so-called combat cocktail. If you're familiar with that phrase, a lot of war veterans at the VA get put on all kinds of different medications. And it can be really hard to come off those medications, which he had to do to enter the trial. And when he was in the depth of the MDMA work, he was working with his own Christian belief. And it became clear that he was dealing with a spiritual, existential question about his soul. Is my soul redeemable after what I've seen and what I participated in, and so on? And what came through, and this is such a beautiful example of how MDMA can work for people, and it often works this way. The question came up of, do I love who I am today? And his answer to himself, he's the one who asked the question, and he answered himself, yeah, I like who I am today. I don't like my behaviors. I don't like that I fly off the handle and yell at my family and so on. But I'm a decent person. I'm a good person. If I'm a good person, as the logic went, maybe he's a 5 too. I have to talk to him about that.
Mm-hmm.
The logic went, well, if I love who I am today, how could I reject any event that ever happened to me in the past? Because every single thing I went through, including all of my combat experiences, made me who I am today. With MDMA therapy, often this sense of self-compassion and a greater awareness of the context of the events that you went through comes online, and you see that you participated in the events that occurred, but you weren't the only person there. You weren't the only factor that was involved in the traumatic experiences. And so he walked away with I guess if I love who I am today, then I'm going to have to figure out how to accept all the things that have happened to me. But he also was confronted with a really interesting problem, which was, whose job is it for me to decide if my soul is redeemable or not? And in his spiritual context, it wasn't his job. And so he handed that over. And that was incredibly beautiful to watch, and also a huge unburdening for him. So there was plenty of work to do to address the things that Keith is talking about in terms of integration. People who have been impacted by trauma and chronic depression and so on have a life that looks and feels like a person's life who has those conditions, and those things often need to be updated.
I love that. So for people who are listening who are unfamiliar with the term MDMA, in club settings or in recreational drug settings, it's called ecstasy. What you're using in trials is pure MDMA. It's not cut with all kinds of other garbage and who knows what that's in it. And it is a drug it's a non-psychedelic, as I understand it, right? So you're not hallucinating, you're not doing any of that stuff. But what it does is it creates an experience, and please correct me, I'll probably be wrong, but it creates an experience in which a person has access to a kind of, first of all, they feel safe, so they can approach trauma, maybe for the first time, without being so activated or dysregulated that they can't function in the moment. Then it creates a sense of self-compassion and trust, also with the therapist, with themselves, and this kind of openness to seeing the big picture. That's what I like. One of the things I love about what I've been researching about psychedelic therapy is, right, like this ability to take off the roof and see the sky above it, right? We get sort of locked in these patterns of thinking. And then when you take off the roof, you go, oh my gosh, there was so much more. And you have a kind of landscape perspective. And with the MDMA, it's this ability to approach trauma, core wounding in a safe way, gives you an ability also to do so in a way that is not because oftentimes that voice of self-condemnation leaks in so fast. Am I capturing this correctly?
I think so. I mean, I just want to double click on something you're referring to that I think is really critical in our conversation about root causes, which is that this rumination, this sort of negativity, the thought loops that we get into, keep us in the illusion that we are separate from other people and separate from God, right? Separate from everything. And what often happens in a psychedelic experience is that those boundaries between self and divinity or self and other dissolve. And it's kind of hard to close Pandora's box once you've had that experience, because it feels very real. Now, some people afterward will say, oh, it was just a drug experience. But people have mystical experiences without psychedelics all the time, right? It can have spontaneous religious awakening, or you could have a near-death experience. There's all kinds of things that can cause that. But the point being that if we know that we're not alone in the world, if we know that through our faith, for example, that we are children of God, let's say, if that's your view, then it's much harder to maintain this, I'm bad, I'm worthless, all of this negative thinking that goes on. So the ability to connect with, for lack of a better word, what is outside of the ego, outside of the separate self, I think is a huge missing piece in our culture. We have this isolationist kind of, really, if you look at the history of Western psychology, having an ego that is functioning well is the pinnacle of achievement. There's no discussion about what happens after that, developmentally, right?
Yes, and I think there is, I appreciate what you're saying about the spiritual experience. It's interesting, and I think about this often. Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've been in a 12-step recovery group for substance use disorder for quite some time. And Wilson in the 1950s was looking at psychedelics because what is at the core of 12-step work is a spiritual experience of sufficient magnitude that it displaces the need for a substance, alcohol, to cope, to do life, right? But for Wilson, alcoholism was a spiritual malady, right? It wasn't a psychological. It was psychological, but not principally psychological, right? So people, a lot of times people in 12-step programs kind of roll their eyes when people talk about Bill Wilson because they, of course, have a natural repulsion toward any substance, right? Like they're like, well, the Bill went off the rails on that one, But I see it as Bill going, wait a minute, this is an avenue toward maybe allowing people to have the kind of dramatic spiritual experience that I had in Towns Hospital when most people have what he called, according to William James, an educational variety kind of experience where it was a gradual spiritual awakening. And so in the world of addictions, and by the way, I see Gabor Mate is, endorsed, is on the cover of the book, and I admire his work greatly. How could this help what are you seeing in the realm of addiction and how psychedelics might be helpful in helping people get free of it?
There's two sort of pathways to go with this question, and it's a really important one. One is the person who's in recovery already. They've been abstinent for a while. And then you ask the question, does a psychedelic therapy experience have a time and place in that person's journey? And of course, often the initial response is, well, it's a drug. Like I don't do drugs. I'm not interested in that. Is it going to cause a relapse? Totally all fair questions to have to ask. And I think the answer is it has to be approached delicately, and it needs to be done for the right reason in that person's recovery process. But I know many people in recovery that have done psychedelic therapy, and it's been profound because often underneath addiction, 99.999 times out of 100 is severe trauma. And it's hard to get to that trauma, through ordinary consciousness. Like you can chip away at it, but the type of disruption that can happen with psychedelic therapy could really be profound for a person. The other thing that sometimes is really powerful is the spiritual piece that Will was talking about, and Ian, you're talking about now, is the spiritual connection, the glimpse that can happen in a psychedelic therapy experience can last a lifetime. Not something to chase, which you could get in that trap. And of course, someone who has an addiction history, we tend to like those traps. Yeah. But the glimpse can really create a opportunity for a deeper connection that's hard to attain in prayer or meditation. It happens, but not in the same way often. Getting so far outside of yourself. And so that can be very powerful for someone that has, a lot of hurt and a lot of baggage still around the process they went through with addiction, and, or they see themselves as fundamentally broken and diseased, or getting in touch with a connection where you feel completely loved in a way you haven't felt before can be very healing. So there's I think there's a time and place. That's pathway one. Pathway two is, well, what about people who are still abusing substances? Is there a time and place to use psychedelics to actually disrupt that? And the answer is yes. There are specific substances that play better for that than others. Depends what your addiction is. But that is also out there. I'd say the primary use cases right now is not disrupting an addiction. It's like when we're talking about psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine, like that's not the primary use case you're going to see. But there's definitely that going on with ibogaine and sometimes ayahuasca and things. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely a conversation, I think, for someone who suffers from, addiction history and approach everything in your healing delicately. I mean, it's like you want to be considerate when you're healing something.
So Will, thank you, Keith. Will, one last question. This is a new frontier. For some people, they're greeting it with tremendous enthusiasm. It's like the way I'm experiencing this whole world right now is it's a little bit like what the Enneagram happened with 10 years ago when we put this book out. There was an underground of people that were into the Enneagram, had been for many, many years. And then this book we wrote popularized it at a sort of a larger marketplace level. And people got frothy mouthed. Like, this is the most, and then it was this over the top kind of enthusiasm, right? Like, this is what you're describing. Like, psychedelic therapy is not a panacea. Take a drug, have a couple of talks, everything's fixed, right? And that's what I love about your book, right? It's like, it's just so prudent. It's like, no, there's more work to be done. It is a tool. It is not a cure-all for what ails you. But what do you say to somebody that's listening to this kind of with their arms crossed and their legs crossed and they're like, I don't know, this just sounds woo-woo wacky. These guys are from Boulder and, what, and they're looking at this whole world. And by the way, everybody, just so you know, this research is going on at Johns Hopkins. It's going on at countless academic centers around the world, King's College London, other places in California, Denver, Chicago. Programs are arising for therapists to be trained in this because we're all waiting for it to be approved by the FDA in the next probably 1 to 3 years is what the people have been saying that for a couple of years too. But anyway, we'll see. This is legitimate, serious stuff. But what do you say to the skeptic that's listening right now and maybe thinking, I don't know, man, this just sounds like a bunch of woo-woo artists?
Well, this comes back to the beginning of our conversation about what's wrong with our current treatments. And I think it's fair to say that psychiatry is a suppressive approach to symptoms, right? We use medication to suppress what ails you, and it takes the edge off and it allows you to cope with your life. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with something that takes the edge off. The problem is that if you stop your Prozac or you stop your lithium or you stop your thing, you're going to have symptoms again, most likely, unless you did the hard work of addressing what was underneath the symptoms. By contrast, psychedelic therapy is what we call an evocative treatment. It evokes the things that are already in you so you can have a look at them. And, it's like taking an engine out of a car. You put it on the block and you can disassemble it and see what's wrong with it and rebuild it. So my goal as a psychiatrist is to put psychiatry in the rearview mirror for people. I want to help them get past the clinic. And what I was trained to do is to keep people on medications for the rest of their life. And I really regret how many people I said, you're going to be on these meds for the rest of your life when I was an early career psychiatrist. But what I found is that when you address the root causes, you can accomplish that goal. And if it takes a while, you have to keep looking, and I think it's a failure of psychiatry to tell people that there aren't more things we can go look for to try to address this.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, what a good place to end. And by the way, everybody, so the name of the book is Psychedelic Therapy, a revolutionary approach to restoring your mental health and reclaiming your life. I just urge you to get a copy of this when it drops. I'm not sure when we're dropping this episode, probably a little before, but you can pre-order it on Amazon right now. So you don't have to wait. That way you'll get a copy of it, as soon as the ball drops. And, guys, thank you so much for being on the show. And I hope our paths cross when I'm in Boulder. And just, keep doing the good work. I'm so fascinated. I was so encouraged by the book. And again, I'm looking forward to how this form of intervention could be of tremendous help to a large number of people. Because for me as a therapist, I've had a similar experience, right? Like you're bumping up against obstacles that are actually, I know sometimes I've been with a client and I thought, man, I'm in the presence of something a lot bigger than me. I can't. And then I have to default to, praying and listening at the same time. It's like it's hard. And I think this is a very interesting step. And of course, for decades, like how many great psychiatric medications have there been? Really, it's been slow going in the field of mental health relative to oncology, relative to other,
right.
Tracks, if you will. So this to me represents something, sort of a landmark moment. And I'm really happy that you guys are at the front end presenting it in a responsible, intelligent, prudent, judicious, and thoughtful way. You're in no way are you selling it. You're not overselling it. You're just saying, here are the facts. This is what we know from our experience. The stories in the book are great that illustrate how these different medicines work. It's readable. It's accessible. It does not load it with clinical language that would be off-putting to someone who's an untrained layperson. Well done. Good work, guys. I'm really glad you were on the show.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, it's been great to be on the show.
Thanks.
You enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Anthony, you.
I can't wait to read this book myself. So you had the advantage of getting the advanced copy, but I will be downloading.
Well, you can come over and get it.
That's right.
I'll download it as soon as it's available. I read on the iPad. So
he doesn't want to see me in person. That's the problem. Okay. We love you, everybody. Again, get the book, Psychedelic Therapy. Will, Keith, thank you. Anthony, thank you. And may you all have love. May you have joy. May you have peace. May you have healing. May you have rest. Until the next time.